All right, gang. So I got some polls built into this thing. I hope you'll answer some polls and participate. So let's see how this goes. If you want to hear me rant on Twitter ever, I've got a Twitter handle down there. We'll see if you like that. So let's open up the talk today and just give you the quick overview of carbs, right? There's 3 monosaccharides, there's 3 disaccharides, there's polysaccharides. It really all revolves around glucose. Almost everything turns into glucose, right? Even the fructose and galactose that you get from table sugar or dairy goes to the liver and gets turned into glucose. It's all glucose, except high fructose corn syrup, which is kind of silly because people think, oh my God, it's all fructose. It's really just table sugar. It's about half fructose and half glucose, although you may not know what I'm really talking about. If I look at sugar intake across the world, the US gets about half its sugar from high fructose corn syrup and the other half from sucrose. I think we're relatively unique. I think there's only one other country that does anything like that. So never mind if that's not of interest to you in the European countries. But I'll also start out by suggesting that I made my own pyramid, food pyramid wise. I don't know how much you see the US food pyramid. It's actually gone now. We use something called My Plate. But in schools for quite a long time, they taught the pyramid idea that the base is where you should get most of your food and the peak is where you should take very small amounts. And I made mine instead of grains, which is what happens in many of these food pyramids, or also the Asian pagoda or the Canadian rainbow. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can do this. I actually put beans at the bottom. I think beans, lentils, peas should be at the bottom of this thing. And then vegetables should come right after that. And above that, to a lesser extent, whole grains, but I'm very much into whole intact grains. So not even just white bread and wheat bread, but wheat berries, the actual whole grain, or oats. Groats is what we call the whole oat, or steel cut oats is pretty good. Whole fruits. I would actually put pasta and brown rice above those. Smaller portions, please. Put lots of tasty things on top of the pasta and brown rice, but make sure the portions of pasta and brown rice are reasonable. Above those, potatoes, whole grains, different kind of breads. But boy, in the US, we eat so much bread and breaded products, donuts and bagels and pizza crusts and bread. And it isn't just bread alone. And then obviously very much limiting our added sugars and soda and candy and things like that. So that's my personal pyramid. I don't think it's going to get published anytime soon, but I'm going to talk about controversies and consensus. And so in the beginning, I'm going to talk about sort of recommended carbohydrate, optimal carbohydrate. And I thought I would start out with a poll. Let me see, where do I go? Okay, so here is poll number 1. You ready? What do you think is the recommended amount of carbohydrate for adults? I'll give you guys about a minute. 118 of you. Who wants to play? Actually, I have a bunch of polls, and for some of them, there isn't really a real answer. For some of them, it's just, I'm trying to get your opinion. Okay, I got, good job. Maybe I should have warned you I was doing polls. Oh, that's not bad, actually. That's just 30 seconds so far. We have almost everybody. Okay, another 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's see what you guys said. You think it's 45 to 75, or maybe 130. Nobody said 0. A couple people said there is no recommended daily level, and some people thought there was other. Okay, stop sharing my poll. Okay, hopefully, did I stop sharing? I don't know. Somebody can confirm. It looked like I was stopping sharing the poll. Okay, gonna go on with slides now. So here's one of the possible answers, at least in the US. We have all these different things. One is 5 to 9 servings of vegetables and fruits a day, 6 to 11 servings of grains. We have something called the daily value that goes on our nutrition fact panel that we put on foods. That assumes 300 grams or 60% of energy, or the dietary reference intakes with the acceptable macronutrient distribution range, where it's 45 to 65, which I would compare to the World Health Organization and say, yeah, this seems to be a fairly common recommendation. Very high amount of carbohydrates, more than half of your calories. Okay, so that's one answer. Here's another answer. If you look at our dietary reference intakes, there's a place in there where it brings up the daily minimum of carbohydrate that would be necessary to support just the brain and central nervous system, since those are organs that don't uptake fat. They exclude dietary fat. They'll take ketones, but they won't get fatty acids, won't go across the blood-brain barrier. They say 130 grams a day, which is somewhat debatable. But without getting into it, let's just say that that's for a 2,000 calorie diet. So 4 calories a gram, 520 calories. That would be about 25% of calories. Several of you chose that. Maybe that was the reason you chose it. But there's actually some cultures that have survived on an extremely low carbohydrate diet. So here's a native Alaskan diet. You can imagine in all the times that it's cold winter weather and snow is covering the ground, there's really not a lot of carbs to harvest from plants that you're growing. And another example would be the Maasai diet, which is very high in animal products and dairy from the cattle that they raise. So we do have some examples like that. And this is actually another paragraph out of the US Dietary Reference Intakes. You can go to section 6, page 9, which brings up these populations that have existed on apparently zero carbohydrate with no apparent effect on health or longevity. Oh my God. Okay, so think about it. I can actually cite things that will say almost everything I had in my poll. 45 to 75% of calories is much more than 25%, is much more than zero. So I don't really know what the answer to that is. I can cite you multiple options. But maybe what's optimal? Okay, so maybe you'll have an opinion on what's optimal. So let's start another poll. I go to question 2 and launch it. So it's really hard to define optimal carb, but what do you guys think optimal is? You're health professionals. You must have thought about this before. I'm giving you quite a range there. I'm not giving you 100%, but gotta have some fat, some protein, but as low as 5%. Well, I already have a couple takers on 5%. I have some ketogenic folks. I got people raising their hands, so maybe Cirrus and Isabel can see if it's worth interrupting me. I'm willing to be interrupted. Okay, slowing down, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, share results. Ooh, pretty amazing spread. Look at this. Okay, other than only a few people picking 5%, I got quite a few pick 25%. 40 seems to be the most popular answer, and 55 for 60 for some. You're all health professionals. How is it that you don't agree on this? Well, I think it's because you don't really get much nutrition in med school, and so glad that Pan is here to help. So here's another population, the Tarahumara Indians. I'm hoping some of you are runners out there and get out and get some exercise. Tarahumara Indians, if you happen to be a marathon runner, are world famous for being ultra marathoners. And historically, their diet was about 90% corn and beans. They have an extremely high carbohydrate diet. And in the course of bartering throughout the day and living some distance apart from one another, they're sort of well known as running around all day and basically running a marathon every day, bartering and traveling around to see their neighbors. So this is amazing that there are some people who can eat almost all fat and protein and no carb, and almost all carb and very little fat, and still have excellent health. Woof. Okay, so humans are incredibly resilient in what they can do with carbs. And there's carbs in lots of foods. So let's talk about which food groups have the carbs. So the US has moved from the pyramid to the plate, which is nice because people eat off plates. They don't eat off pyramids. So let me put some more foods on here to suggest that these are the foods in the food groups. So let's see, where are those carbs again? Yeah, veggies are mostly carbs. That's true. And fruits, yeah, most of the calories are carbs. And dairy, yeah, that has lactose. So there's carbs there. And breads, grains are mostly carbs. And if you go to the protein group and you look at the beans and the peas, those are mostly carbs too. There are carbs everywhere. It's really hard to eat a diet with a lot of variety and not eat a lot of carbs because they are everywhere. So we have high quality carbs and low quality carbs. And here's my next poll. Okay, next poll is, wait, I have to stop sharing. Oh, maybe I never stopped sharing that. Sorry if I didn't stop sharing the last poll. Was that in the way? Okay, trying to get my logistics down here. Here's the next poll. Now, this is the US. I'm fairly ashamed of my own country. I want to know what proportion of energy in the US diet you think comes from low quality carbohydrates. Yes, I am embarrassed for my neighbors and friends. Oh, you guys are getting really fast at the poll. Thank you. Okay, thank you for monitoring, Isabel and Cirrus. No, you're not interrupting me yet, so I'm assuming I can just go on. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, end poll, share results. Okay, there you go. Everybody seems to think that America is in as bad a shape as I thought. So I'm glad we're all in agreement. Okay, let me see if it works to finally stop sharing this one. Okay, hopefully I stopped sharing. Okay,
Christopher, just 1 second. Everything's working fine. The polls are working fine. Everything's good.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is a publication that I really like from 2019 by Shan et al. That 42% of energy intake is derived from low quality carbs in the US. And it starts out with a graphic like this that shows from about 2000 to 2016, pretty incredible how stable total carbs, total fat, and total protein are. It's a little silly that these trends are all statistically significant. It's just because there's a crap ton of people and very narrow confidence intervals and standard deviations. So I guess we're eating a little bit fewer carbs, a little bit more fat, and a little bit more protein. But wouldn't you say that's pretty stable over 15 years? But this is the better slide. So this is breaking it down into types of carbohydrates, types of protein, and types of fat. So for the sake of time, let me just oversimplify and say we get about 10% of our calories from each of monosaturated and polyunsaturated fats, right? Would you agree it's close to 10? And let's just say animal and plant are both 10, even though plant's about half of animal. So in the 5 to 10 range here, high quality carbs are in the 10 range here. Everything is in the range of 10, except this. This is the elephant in the room, or the loaf of bread in the room. This is, oh my God. And look, thank goodness we're doing a little bit better, but it's still frightening that we have improved from 45% of our calories to 42. That is still a problem. So let's talk about some consensus. There's a lot of people who are interested in getting rid of those low quality carbs. These are our popular diet books in the US, the Atkins diet, the paleo diet, the zone diet. These are all low carb books. And these are all more high carb, low fat books, DASH diet, Mediterranean, the Ornish diet. And so in terms of added sugars, as much as it appears we bicker in the US, there is uniform agreement that we are eating way too many added sugars. And in terms of white wheat flour, same thing. Even though we have all the low carbers on the left and all the high carbers on the right, they all agree we should be cutting down on this wheat flour. Okay, but then think about this. How much sugar should there be in a healthy diet? This is kind of a trick question. So let me see if I get this next one going. Question 4 on your mark, get set, go. How much sugar should there be in a healthy diet? Wow, the 0 folks have just leaped into the lead. Okay, a couple at 5%, couple at 10. Somebody out there has a sweet tooth. Okay, there's a few people that are even higher. Oh, you guys are doing great at the poll. Thank you for being so engaged in the polls. Okay, when I get to like 75%, I'm gonna quit because that's enough. Oh, no, you've slowed down at 70%. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we never got to 75. We got to 73%. And a lot of you said 0, some said 5, and some said 10. So stop sharing my poll, get rid of this. And it's kind of a trick question. So let's talk for a minute about the sugars in vegetables and fruits. So think of the non-sugar carb that's starch that I have in green here, sucrose itself found directly in vegetables and fruits, and free glucose and free fructose. So you can see in something like a sweet corn or a sweet potato or even banana, there's actually quite a bit of starch. But look how much sucrose and glucose and fructose there is in these. And as you might expect, fruits are sweeter than vegetables. So look how many more of these simple sugars you're going to get from 100 grams of a fruit serving versus 100 grams of vegetables. Okay, now in the US, we are pushing for 2.5 cups of vegetables a day minimum. That would be 5 half-cup servings, and 2 cups of fruit. So 4 half-cup servings. So between that, that would be 9 servings, 5 half-cup servings of vegetables, 2 of fruits. And I put them down for you here. I just picked randomly some pretty common vegetables and fruits, how many calories it would contribute to get a half a cup from them, and how much sugar would be in them. 13 grams of sugar from veggies, 30 grams of sugar from fruits. So I put all that together. It's about 300 calories worth of your diet. Do you have a 2,000 calorie diet, 3,000 calorie diet? This would be 10% of a 3,000 calorie diet or 15% of a 2,000 calorie diet. There'd be 45 grams of natural sugars. That's 180 calories from sugar. I think America is suffering from a sugar from whole food deficient diet. They're not getting enough vegetables and fruits. And so I'm trying to push, on the positive side, instead of all this stop eating sugar, restrict saturated fat, restrict meat. Encourage your patients. Say, you know what, you should probably get about 180 calories a day from sugar, but I would like you to get them in vegetables and fruits because there is a fair amount of sugar and sweetness in vegetables and fruits. I don't know, how manipulative is that? I thought there was a more positive approach. Hopefully that'll be a nice tip for you. Okay, and when you're eating all these carbs and not avoiding them, you are getting fiber, and this may not be helpful to you. I saw that talk number 3 was all about the microbiome. So maybe I'll go quickly. I don't know how many of you get to see all the talks, but if you saw the last one, this might be redundant. I have a great relationship with 2 of the US's most famous microbiologists, and they have a great book. If you ever want to see this, The Good Gut, Erica and Justin Sonnenberg, this incredible husband-wife team run an incredible lab in the US, and I stole Justin's slides. So we'll do this really quickly since you already had in talk number 3, probably something really similar to this. So here's our cartoon of our small intestine opening up to our large intestine. We've got circulation running throughout so that we can absorb things from this. And the simple idea is that humans make about 20 different enzymes to digest carbohydrates, which is relatively limited given how many carbohydrate molecules we put in our mouth in our diet, whereas collectively the microbiome makes about 10,000 enzymes. They are ready to degrade just about anything if you have a healthy microbiome, if you have a healthy microbial diversity, which a lot of us do not. A lot of us are having our microbial diversity depleted. Simple idea that when we get those added sugars in refined grains, yep, we can break down the sucrose and the starch. No problem, goes right in the circulation. And look at these bacteria just languishing. They look so hungry and sad and lonely. Oh, don't do that to them. If you will eat some healthy carbs that has fiber like broccoli, you will get some carbs to absorb there. So you get a little energy out of that. But the fibers, we don't have the enzymes to digest, will go to the colon, where the microbes are very happy. There's plenty of bacteria that can digest the fibers in broccoli. So they get fueled. In the process of fueling them, they make small molecules that we absorb, things like short-chain fatty acids. And we are getting more and more of a hint of how this affects immune function and lowers inflammation. Looks very promising. And so the Sonnenbergs like to call these carbs that make it to the colon that are digested by the bacteria microbiota accessible carbohydrate. It tends to be more soluble fiber than insoluble fiber, but it actually isn't all soluble fibers. And then we have a terrible joke in the US that MAC is, the acronym is MAC. And so the Sonnenbergs are promoting a Big Mac diet. Isn't that a horrible joke? Okay, but only in the microbiota accessible carbohydrate area. So we have 2 very different metabolic scenarios. One is the classic US junk food, which is not feeding the microbiome, and they're dying off and being lost, and we're trying to help people recover their depleted microbiome, and a more plant-based diet, which would have that fiber. I'm guessing that you got a lot of that before in your last talk, but I don't know if you would have ever seen this. This is an electron microscopy picture that the Sonnenbergs won an award for. I'm not sure what institution gave them the award, but right here they've stained the different bacteria in the lumen of the gut of the colon, and this is a mouse colon. And the green here has been stained. This is the mucus lining that separates our intestinal contents from our body. And these blue stained things here are the nuclei of the colonocytes. So here's our body, and here's our intestinal contents. And he did an experiment in mice about what happens when you jeopardize this barrier between us. So now, I'm sorry, it's been flipped. So now the cells of our body are over here. Here's the mucus lining. Here's the intestine of our gut. From 2 mouse studies, this one got a fiber-rich diet, and the bacteria were thriving on the fiber that they were being fed. In the fiber-deficient diet, what they observed was the mucus lining is actually composed of a lot of carbohydrate-rich substances, and the bacteria were eating the lining of the intestine, making this more susceptible to leaky gut syndrome or more opportunities for infection to burst through. So the microbiome is such a hot topic. In the US, we have all this carb phobia going on right now. It's ridiculous. They've flip-flopped like whiplash from low fat to low carb. Really should just be good carbs and good fats. I have a lot of people obsessed with protein. God, I'm not getting enough protein. Oh, don't even get me started on the protein rant. But with low carbs and high meat, fiber is just going down and down and down. And we have national recommendations to get about 30 to 40 grams a day. And our population, according to the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, gets much less than that. The Sonnenbergs have poop in their lab from the Hadza, traditional hunter-gatherer tribe, and actually are getting pockets of this from the few remaining traditional hunter-gatherer tribes around the world. And what's really interesting is how incredibly diverse their microbiome is, the absence of chronic degenerative disease like diabetes, and the enormous amount of fiber. So when Americans are complaining that we want them to go from 10 to 15 grams to 30 to 40, I'd like to whip out this slide and say there are populations that eat a whole lot more fiber than that. So don't cry about how much fiber we want you to eat, and enjoy it. Think of fabulous global fusion of flavors. You can be having hummus, you can be having all kinds of bean and rice and lentil dishes. Oh my God, Latin American, Middle Eastern, Mediterranean, Asian, so many fabulous diets that are very tasty, that have a lot of carbs and always had a lot of carbs in them. So we just published a paper on this, and I won't have time to go through it, but if we have time for questions, maybe you can ask me later. We fed 18 people a very high fiber diet and 18 people a very high fermented food diet. And in the high fermented food diet, we increased microbial diversity, not just from the fermented foods they were eating. That we have an interesting response. Other bacteria appeared that weren't actually in the fermented foods that we were serving them. And we saw a striking decrease in inflammatory signals and activity. The high fiber diet was a little weirder. I don't have time to go into this, but I'm just going to say we didn't see a net decrease in inflammation, but we found 3 subgroups, which is a little hard to talk about because there's only 18 people. But we had quite a few people who had low baseline microbiota diversity. They actually had an increase in inflammation as opposed to who had high microbial diversity at baseline. They saw a decrease in inflammation. And the Sonnenberg's interpretation of this was, in a Western diet, depleted microbiome, you start throwing a lot of high fiber at them, you may not get a positive response. That might be quite a challenge for someone with a depleted microbiome. Anyway, we're really excited to continue working in this area. We have multiple studies going on. We have single fiber with a supplement, multiple fiber in a supplement, or food. We have single bacteria from a supplement, multiple bacteria in a probiotic supplement, or food. And the challenge is there are so many permutations of what to give them for a dietary intervention. so many metrics of the microbiome, not just diversity, but there's many different ways to characterize the microbiome. And then when we move over to the immune function, oh my God, we don't have a clinical measure for that yet, do we? It's not CRP, it's not interleukin 6. There's hundreds of inflammatory markers or ways that we could modify or test and get metrics from the immune system. So that's going to have to wait. We don't know a lot about this yet, but we are very excited about the possibilities. And so because I do lots of studies like this, I got invited recently to participate with the American Diabetes Association on some updated guidelines, which had been frustrating a lot of people for a while because historically, at least in the US, for diabetes, a low carb diet was recommended, which made sense. People with diabetes have a hard time managing their glucose. But a low carb diet is, by definition, a high fat diet if you're getting enough calories to maintain your weight. And we learned early on that people with type 2 diabetes in particular had a threefold risk of heart disease compared to those without diabetes. And so, oh my God, we actually need to switch to a low fat diet, which should have been low saturated fat, so that we can stem this tide of heart disease in people with diabetes. And then flipped back again and say, okay, it's not really just total carb or total fat. We should get them to avoid saturated fat for the heart disease, but include unsaturated fat, because what they're doing is now the diabetics are having fewer calories from fats and much more added sugar and refined grains. So let's say, yes, include the unsaturated fat. And when you do choose carbohydrate-rich foods, pick the ones with a low glycemic index or low glycemic load. So that's the direction we've been having. And I was really pleased to be part of this group here to come up with a 2019 consensus report around what we should tell people with diabetes. And we actually made an interesting shift, which apparently has not been done before in the ADA guidelines. And instead of focusing so much on nutrients, we had a whole section focusing on diet patterns, which is also true in the US for dietary guidelines. We've been switching more toward patterns of food. And then looking at a number of outcomes, these are very specific to diabetes, right? Actual onset of diabetes or glycosylated hemoglobin reduction, but also considering less heart disease, lipid panel, weight loss, blood pressure. And we evaluated all these for the strength of the evidence and the direction of the evidence. And so it looked like you could lose weight on anything, not a lot of weight, and we don't have long-term success, but all of the diets are viable for weight loss if you get a restriction in calories. Most of them are good for blood pressure. But look, I mean, step back and look at this overall thing. Which diet looks the best across the range of everything? Doesn't it look like low carb and very low carb? So there were a lot of people who saw these guidelines and said, thank you, thank you. It seems like you had moved away, so far away from low carb and very low carb, that people were eating low fat and too much added sugar and refined grain. And this is not good for our patients with diabetes. Okay, but as many X's as we have for benefits for various things here, is an important missing couple of cells here. So let me get rid of the rest. And if we're just talking diabetes, isn't it great that low carb and very low carb are great for glycosylated hemoglobin control, but so are Mediterranean and vegan and vegetarian. And these have evidence of reducing the risk of diabetes, as does the DASH diet. So is this a downfall of these studies? And I want to just have you think about whether this absence of a check mark here is evidence of an absence of effect or absence of evidence, which means no studies. And really, it's the latter. In the US, decades ago, we did the Diabetes Prevention Program, which was a low-fat diet, not compared to low carb. It was compared to medication or nothing. And it was very successful, but there was no other diet that was compared to it. This is tens of thousands of people followed for many years, and it was a very expensive study, which has never been replicated in low carb or very low carb. So it's quite possible that we could have a good quality carb, good quality fat study, but it's going to take another $1 billion to do this. And as of now, I would not really count this against low carb and very low carb, because it's not evidence that low carb doesn't work. No. It's an absence of randomized controlled trials with hard outcomes, with clinical outcomes. You can see the risk factor. That's easy to do in months. This takes decades and tens of thousands of people. But it does bring up this interest in the ketogenic diet. So I got another poll for you. Ready for another poll? We just did a study and it's about to be published. I think I don't actually have the acceptance letter in hand, but I'm fairly optimistic that we're going to get this study published. But it's interesting as we look to do this study and we ask people what they think a ketogenic diet is. It's really low carb. Yes, definitely very low carb. But what is the rest of it? So if it's only 5% protein, what's the percent fat? Sorry, if it's only 5% carb, what's the percent fat and protein in the diet? What do you guys think? You're a little slower on this one. This one's a harder question. And I don't know how popular ketogenic diet is in Europe, but I'm seeing quite a few answers. So it looks like we're getting quite a few people to respond. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And I'm getting a lot of people to 75% fat, 20% protein, 60 fat, 35% protein. Good, good, good. Okay, it is. It is a really high fat diet. And what we get in the US, at least, is we have a lot of people misinterpreting this as a high protein diet. And just quickly think about this. There's no place to store protein. It's all functional. If you've eaten beyond what you need for your muscle, enzyme, hormones, et cetera, you convert it to what? First, you convert it to carb, which would basically throw you out of ketosis by doing that. So the well-formulated ketogenic diet is extremely high in fat. And so what does that mean you get to eat? So if you're really going 5% carbs, what the hell is left? You can have a little bit of berries. You can have above ground veggies, but you can't have carrots, can't have corn, can't have anything starchy. Gosh, oh my gosh, we're finding it hard to get people to eat this. I don't know if you've seen these two TEDx talks. They're both 20 minutes long. Sarah Hallberg and Neil Bernard have these 20-minute TEDx talks where they have reverse diabetes, and Dr. Hallberg's is on a ketogenic diet, and Dr. Bernard's is on a low-fat vegan diet, and they are polar opposites. I think the common factor is they both get rid of added sugar and refined grain. I don't really have time to go into that, but I will tell you that we launched a study where we agree, yes, added sugar and refined grain, that needs to go. But the ketogenic diet, to get to 5% fat, does mean getting rid of grains and fruits and beans. And that seems wrong. So in our study, we decided, let's compare a keto and med and let's define them this way. We want them to both have non-starchy vegetables. We want them to both avoid added sugar and refined grain. But when it comes to beans, fruits, and whole intact grains, keto should avoid and Mediterranean would include. So after getting rid of your added sugars and refined grain, within the US, again, is 42% of calories. Is there really an additional benefit to getting rid of those? So here's our study design quickly, and I should move even more quickly so I can get some of your questions in the time remaining. So basically, it was a crossover study. For the first 4 weeks of two 12-week phases, we delivered food to get high adherence, and then they provided food on their own, and then they switched to the other one. And then we actually tracked them for another 12 weeks, having tried both diets. This is 20 people with type 2 diabetes and 20 with pre-diabetes, randomized. What were they eating later after they had done both diets? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to go quickly because I'm at the end, getting toward the end of my time. So baseline, people were not eating keto. They were sort of eating Mediterranean. When we delivered food, this is pretty good for internal validity. We had made scores of adherence. So 10 is top adherence and 0 is little. Look at this. They have on average, and I don't have time to go into the variability, which is actually very interesting in and of itself. But on average, they had the same high adherence of 7.5. Then they were making it on their own, which was harder. And they had an average adherence score of 5.5. So important to recognize, we do not have perfect adherence here. We have more generalizability than rigor in this study. And you can't tell anybody what we found because it's not published yet. Really quickly, both groups lowered their glycosylated hemoglobin, and the difference was not statistically significant. this is one of my last points, is this is very interesting here that insulin improved on both, not different. LDL cholesterol improved on Mediterranean, but got worse on keto. They both improved HDL, not different. They both improved triglyceride, but keto was better for triglyceride lowering. They both lowered liver enzymes and they both lost weight. These are so close. I'm really finding it hard to believe it was almost statistically significant, but technically not at 0.05. So look at this overall thing. So is there a benefit on top of reducing added sugar and refined grain to then also getting rid of whole grains and fruits and beans? This is kind of a wash. Their glycosylated hemoglobin improved for both. Mediterranean's better for LDL. Keto's better for triglyceride. So this is one of my last slides. Do you think it's worth it to eliminate all these other groups after eliminating added sugar and refined grain, which I think most people will agree should be the focus? And maybe this recommendation should be different for the general population versus those with diabetes, because they have the hardest time cutting back on their carbs and controlling their carb. So I'm going to end on a happy note-ish. As much as I think there are controversies out there in the nutrition world, I have to say that when I participated in this American Diabetes Association group to make new updated guidelines, and I've done this with the American Heart Association, I've done it with a group called the Menus of Change group that involves chefs, I find no one who disagrees with this, not even the keto group or the vegan group, okay? Even vegan low fat, which is, I can't think of anything as more polar extreme. It's ketogenic, vegan, low fat. They all agree here. And these are huge issues for us. Could we please work on the things we all agree on? People aren't eating enough vegetables. We need to get people to find more delicious ways to make vegetables, because there are, and eat more whole foods, not processed foods, and get rid of these. And then beyond that, I have to say most professionals, okay, we're gonna have to get rid of the keto and the vegans here. Almost everybody agrees on these. All right, lectins in beans. Yeah, but there's so many great things in beans. Let's not worry about the lectins. Oh my God, fruits have sugars. Yes, but it's in a matrix of the food. The sugars from fruits are not absorbed as readily as they are from added sugars. Oh my God, the nuts have fats. Yes, but it's unsaturated fat. Oh my God, the eggs have cholesterol. Yes, but if you look, saturated fat in the diet has a much larger impact on blood cholesterol than dietary cholesterol does. This is a rounding error. Plus, how many people in the US eat a crappy, sugary, carb-rich breakfast? I'd rather have them eat eggs than those carbs on carbs on carbs. And vegetarians, I'm sorry, fish have a face. Yes, I agree. But fish is a pretty great source of nutrients. So almost everybody agrees there. We go to the next one. Maybe less agreement on grains, but more if we make it whole intact grains. If we're talking steel cut oats, brown rice, wheat, berries, barley, I think we get people on board as opposed to donuts, cookies, and refined breads. And poultry, if we got pasture raised, not concentrated animal feeding operations, antibiotic infused, deep fried Kentucky fried chicken poultry, I think we'd get agreement. And I won't have time, but there is some agreement on red meat and dairy. If we're talking yogurt, again, if we're talking animals raised in a more reasonable way and not, again, on this concentrated animal feeding operation. So it's stunning to me that we have so much agreement on a foundational diet if you get scientists in a room with evidence, and that the public is looking at the headlines, seeing all these sensationalist things, saying, oh my God, the nutrition people never agree. It's not true. We actually agree a lot. So the last one that I won't have time for, I don't know how much of a deal, I'm not even going to do this poll. I would be curious how many, no, I'm not going to do the poll. So we have a little battle going on in the US between an investigator named David Ludwig and another named Kevin Hall about the explanatory model of obesity. Is it the conventional energy balance model, energy in, energy out, or is it the carbohydrate insulin model, which says it's not that we're getting heavy because we eat too much, it's that we eat too much carb, which makes us hungry, which stores energy too fast. And so the silly thing here is both of them say at the end of the day, eat less goddamn added sugar and refined grain. There's actually more agreement in these two than you would think. Okay, so I'm going to skip that, go back to my carbohydrate pyramid. I'm an eco warrior too, and so I'm very interested in this Barilla, very cool double pyramid that says, okay, here's the foods you should eat the most of and the least. And if you want to look at the environmental impact, it's a flip, because here's the foods with the biggest environmental impact and the lowest. It's a double win if you eat down here or on my pyramid, which is pretty similar. Okay, anyway, thank you very much. I would like to take a few questions, but I am going to have to go fairly soon. I have another meeting to go, but I will go a little late if I can take some of your questions. Thank you so much for inviting me to this. Maybe you can tweet at me and I could answer on Twitter or something, but Isabel and Cyrus, give me a couple.